Good morning. It is time to begin this morning. We welcome all who have come in today. Is the mic on at all? Usually that's not a problem for me. Is that better? All right. Well, good morning. It is time to begin this morning. We welcome all who are with us today as we start a new quarter. If you're visiting with us and you're haven't been here before or not a member of the church, we welcome you here today. And if you're looking for a church home, I suggest that maybe you found one. We are so grateful that you are with us today, and we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. If you're already a member of the church and you're just visiting with us, we hope that you would take any opportunity that you have to come back and to be with us at another time. If you're looking for Clay this morning, you're in the right spot. Clay is out of town. For some reason, he's got this real bad habit of wanting to start classes and then be gone. And then he makes me fill in for him, but I'm happy to be here with you today. So Clay is going to be the regular teacher right here on Sunday mornings as we go through the Gospel Advocate Foundations book of Ezra and Nehemiah. So we are starting a new quarter. The following weeks, we're going to be discussing the return to Israel and the rebuilding of the wall as we find the writings from these two prophets. Who needs a book? Anybody else need a book? We've got a few around. Anybody else need a book? Raise your hand up nice and high. All right. Well, there are some out. I've got some up here after class. If you want to approach me, I'm a pretty affable guy. I'll give you a book for free. And they'll be out in the foyer on the shelving if you need one. But this is the book that we'll be going through this quarter. A little bit about Ezra as we start this morning. Ezra traces his priesthood back to Aaron. So later on, I'm not sure exactly all the chapters and topics, as these are a bit of a survey class between Ezra and Nehemiah, what verses will be covered. But in Ezra chapter 7, verses 1 to 5, the lineage of Ezra is carried back all the way to Aaron. So he is of the tribe of Levi, and he is in full service as a Levitical priest. He was also a scribe, and he was well versed in the law of Moses. So this is an individual who was deeply rooted in the procedures of God, one who was most likely very affected by the transition of being in a far-off land. He was out of a job, right? The functionality of his job on a day-to-day basis was not allowed to him as he was in captivity. And if you remember, the captivity lasted for 70 years. So either way, if he was an older man that was still living or a younger man that maybe wasn't able to ever be a part of this sacrificing and the things that were going on at the temple at the time, this would have been a wonderful thing to him to be able to go back to Jerusalem, to build the wall and to begin the worship of God again in earnest at home. And that's what we'll be looking at as we go through. Ezra is divided generally into two sections: the return from the exile, about the first 6 chapters there, and then finally his work as he gets to work in earnest. This morning we'll be going through just the first part of Ezra, chapters 1 and 2 a little bit, as we talk about going home. You know, there's never quite a feeling like going home. Maybe you've been on a long journey and you come home and you open the door, and the first thing that hits me is the smell of the house. Smell is where memory lasts in your body. That's the biggest sense that we have that's tied to memory. And when you open that door and the smell of home hits you for the first time, I'm home. What a wonderful thing it is. Maybe you've been in military service and have been overseas, and we're able to finally come home after a long stay. There's never quite a feeling like going home. And that's the feeling that we're going to be looking at this morning as the Israelites who have been in captivity for 70 years are finally going home. It's fun to be on vacation, right? It's fun to travel. I love to travel. The job that I have affords me a little bit more travel in my life. I went to Japan last year for a whole week. Jenny was not happy that I went to Japan for a whole week and left her with 3 kids. But it was all right. We got to talk. I experienced some wonderful things in my travel. Shortly after I went to Japan, I went to Denmark. And I was able to go to Europe for the first time for a very short amount of time to enjoy the activities over there as I did my work. But there's never quite an activity like coming home, because when you're away from home, everything's different. It always seems like things are a bit more expensive on vacation. That at home you're kind of used to the trappings of the local eateries, and you get your bill and you're kind of accepting of that. But when you go out and eat, sticker shock kind of sets in, right? It's a little bit more expensive. It's a little bit more difficult to navigate. Roger and Rhonda, we were just talking about the permit of the national parks, right? How difficult it is sometimes to go away, and the unexpected nature of what it's like to be in a foreign land or to be elsewhere. And as I always say, the places that I go, it's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. And it's nice to go home. The thing about coming home and being home is that when you come back, it might not be the same. Things have changed. You've grown. You've gotten bigger. Have you ever been away for a time, maybe from a home that you grew up from, and you go back, and that's an awful lot smaller than I thought it was? That sure looked a lot bigger when I was little, right? Things change. We change and we develop, and that's okay. Because when we go home and when we see the difference of how we've grown, we should be proud of that. Or maybe we should take a second pause if we haven't grown quite the way we need to. And it's okay that things might not be the same, and that we can gauge our growth and what we've done in that time away from home. Another thing to think about is that you'll find that you're different. You're not going to be the same individual, and that it can never be the same again. The experience that you had growing up, it can never be the same, and you can't recapture that moment. And that's okay. We don't need to live in the past. We can live in the future. We can live in the present, and we can be proud that we're different and that we have grown today. And we're going to look at the things that it means to go home and the gifts and the blessings that God gives us as we are perhaps out and about doing our things, but then how he takes care of his people to bring them to him and gather them together and to send them home. And that's what we'll be looking at this morning as we get into Ezra chapter 1. I invite you to open your Bibles or follow along in the book this morning as we read through the book of Ezra. We'll start with the first 4 verses of chapter 1 with the kingly pronouncement. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given to me, and he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you of all his people? May his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord of Israel. He is God, which is in Jerusalem. And whoever is left in any place where he dwells, let the men of his place help him with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, besides the freewill offerings for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem." We find this kingly pronouncement by King Cyrus. He became king of Persia in about 559 BC. And these dates aren't exact, so if I throw out a date here, if I'm off by a few years, that's okay. Just the general timeline. It's, the ancient times here. And then he started his Babylonian reign in 539. So there was a time when he became over Persia and started being king of Persia, and then he took over Judean rule in 539. And this is the first year of Jewish rule. So that's what we're talking about here. He wasn't a new king. This wasn't his first year of reign. It was just the first year that he ruled over these people. And in this first year, he made this wonderful proclamation that we'll be looking at, this wonderful pronouncement. Possibly he's a descendant of Elam. Elam is the son of Shem, one of the sons of Noah. So perhaps he can trace his lineage directly back to Noah. Now, scholars are a little bit, squishy on this. We don't know if that's for sure, but it's a possibility. So overall, if we look at this, this is a family problem. That if he is in fact a descendant of Elam, he's a direct descendant of Noah, as we all are eventually. This was a family issue, that he saw that his kindreds, through the inspiration of God, were in trouble and needed to go home. And so as a family member to them, as a kindred spirit, he sent them home. Historically, he was known to be a benevolent ruler. There were those like the Assyrians that were very, very cruel to people, that were very torturous in the way that they transported people even to the occupied lands that they would be inhabiting. A lot of times the Assyrians would shackle people and put hooks in their nose and then chains on the end of that hook and drag them along as they were marched to wherever they were going. Very, very terrible people. Cyrus, even though he was a conqueror, he was known to be very benevolent and to allow people to have their own government structure within the series of people that they had. They were able to keep their religion and to observe their religious practices. So he wasn't a tyrant in any way that would dismiss that. He allowed the worship of the heavenly God, of Yahweh God, among his people. And a prophecy announced his arrival 200 years before his birth. So we see this in Isaiah chapter 44, when we read, "Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple, your foundation shall be laid." Isaiah records here the words of God as God predicts and lays forth the foundation and the prophecy here that Cyrus will behave. He'll get along with the people, and he will shepherd the people and perform the will of God in rebuilding the temple and laying the foundation back with Jerusalem. Also in Isaiah 45, verse 1, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and to loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors so that the gates will not be shut." Again, a prophecy of Cyrus coming and being an instrument of God before his people. So again, we have this kingly pronouncement. It's an act of divine interposition, that we have the idea that God has instructed Cyrus in such a way that he stirred him up. I've shared this example before. It's, to me, the same idea that comes out of 1 Peter, where we are to stir one another up. And the example that always comes to mind for me, if anybody remembers, is a bottle of ketchup. Ketchup is hydrophobic. It's a Newtonian fluid. It separates out, right, when it sits there, kind of like orange juice, right? So when you pick up a jar of orange juice, what's the first thing you do? You shake it up, get it back into solution, make it more useful. That's the same thing that happens with ketchup. If it sits for too long, it gets stagnant and it's no good to use it because you tip it over and just a bunch of water comes out and it's yucky and it's no good. Kind of the idea here that Cyrus was sitting there and God made him useful by stirring up his heart. He stirred him up into action. And that's what happened here, that there was an act of divine interposition here, that God stirred up Cyrus in his own heart, didn't take away Cyrus's free will. We don't want to say that. God didn't grab him and make him do something, but he stirred something up in Cyrus, and Cyrus was allowed to act in his own way. Shown here with the favorable meaning, right? Sometimes we struggle with that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, or allowed it to be so, right? That this was a favorable thing that we see here. And the one thing that this drives home, this is a quote, I think, from the Benson commentary that I was looking at, is that the hearts of the kings are in the hand of the Lord. The hearts of the kings are in the hand of the Lord. We saw just the previous scripture that we read, that Cyrus was an instrument to God. He was a tool of service to God, and God held his hand. The governments that we serve are instruments and tools of God, whether or not they're doing a good job or not. And probably more often than not, they're not doing that great of a job. They're God's instruments. And the leaders that we have are hopefully taking that hand that's provided to them by God and walking with him as they go along. We have to remember that the governments and the leaders that we have are established through the will of God, and that we need to do everything that we can to support them and to lead them then and influence them into a godly manner. He said, the God of heaven, meaning literally Jehovah God. He knew the name of God. He understood who this was. Charged me to do something. Now, where did that charge come from? Well, it could have come from Isaiah. It could have come from Daniel, who was a contemporary of Cyrus. Or it could have also come from inward suggestion, that there was something that stirred him up, whether through reading or influence of others, or just seeing the change within himself and seeing a need that needed to be addressed. He was stirred up, that Jehovah God charged him to do something. Specifically, to build a house for God in Jerusalem, and he said, which is in Judah. Now, the only reason that would be very specific is because it was the southern tribes that were initially taken from him, right? He wouldn't have known necessarily about the northern tribes that the Assyrians took away and pounded into the earth and just decimated and just made nothing. He would have had Benjamin, Judah, and some of Levi, and that's who we see. There might have been a smattering of others if they came down to those tribes, but those are the majority of the people that we're looking at: Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites. So we're going to make this house, right? And he addresses this decree to all the inhabitants of Persia. If you remember from the previous class that we had in here, I don't know if it was last quarter or the quarter before, was on Esther. And the idea of the expanse of the Babylonian reign, right? All the way from I think it was Ethiopia to Greece. It was just this huge amount of territory that they covered. And so it was a dispatch to all these people. So all the Jews that would have lived in that area were told to come and to be able to go home. He provides liberty and a desire for the Jews to go home. It wasn't a requirement. Maybe there were some that were very old and feeble and couldn't healthily make the journey. They weren't forced out of the land. Some that would want to stay. Maybe they had families and businesses and they had no desire to go back to the nation that God had provided, to the land that God provided for them. They weren't forced out, but he provided liberty. He allowed for that and a desire for them to go home. He motivated them by providing them gifts. And then there was no requirement for them to come back. He didn't put shackles on them that said, well, you can go for a season and then you have to come back and serve me again. It was an open invitation. The doors were left wide open that they could go, they could be free and be happy, pursue their dreams and pursue their life in God, and no requirement to return. And there was also a call to the pagan population for help. He said, if you're not going, you need to help, but also the neighbors around you in this pronouncement, you should help as well. The non-Jewish neighbors were helped to propel the journey. He said, I want you to give them gifts to help them in their journey, and you need to also give a free will offering to help rebuild the temple. There was a two-part request, or not a request, it was a decree, so it was a command. There was two parts to that. Help your neighbor, and then help us fulfill the will of God by building his temple. You need to give monetarily to the person and then monetarily to God. So what do we see here? The application as we have these first four verses. One, that God is alive and well today and active in propelling his will through means that we cannot comprehend. C.S. Lewis stated in one of his writings, I think it was The Problem of Pain, that God's will is going to get done whether or not you help or not. This is kind of the paraphrase is what I'm going to give you there. That whether or not you choose to engage or whether or not you choose not to engage, God's will is going to get done. And we can't comprehend how he's going to do it. And it's not really our job to comprehend how he's going to do it. We just know that it's going to be done. But God is alive and well today. And his will be accomplished regardless if we participate or not. And the benefit is if we participate, we have a home to go to. If we don't participate, we have a death to go to. So I would encourage all of us today to participate willingly. God is giving us. There we go. Application 2, as we walk our spiritual path, we may find help on our journey from unexpected sources. I believe if the Jews had woken up one day and a neighbor had said, you know what, I think tomorrow the king's going to let us go and he's going to make our pagan neighbors give us money. Said, you're crazy. It's never going to happen. Yet as we walk our spiritual path, we don't know what doors God will open for us and where we might find help along the way. God is the Father of truth. So wherever truth comes from, it's his. Because truth is truth. As Greg mentioned this morning, it's not our truth, it's not your truth, it's not my truth, it's not a truth, it's the truth. One specific line of truth, and God is the Father and author of that truth. And we don't know where that truth is going to come from in our life and help us along the way. One of my favorite stories in the Old Testament was when David was leaving Jerusalem after Absalom had taken over, and he was walking kind of in a pit, and there was a guy named Shimei. He was on a hill, and he was kicking rocks, literally kicking rocks and throwing rocks at David, hurling insults. You're worthless. You're terrible. Shimei was a Benjamite. He was really sore that Saul had died and that David had taken over. He was just really making a scene. Two of David's men said, should we go up and kill this guy? Get rid of him? And David said, no, God might have sent him to criticize me. Maybe what he's saying is true. I need to take that and internalize that and think about how this is affecting me and how God wants me to hear this. We don't know where that truth is going to come from, and we might find help on our journey from unexpected sources, sometimes through negative means, sometimes through positive means. We need to be open to that and see how God is working in our lives. Any questions or comments or thoughts or special feelings you want to share before we go on to the next thing? All right. If you do have a question or comment or anything, just shoot your hand up, and I'll direct it to one of the elders in the class, so they'll take care of it. So, the next we see is the keen purpose. The next few verses there in Ezra chapter 1. Then the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites, with all those spirits God had moved, arose to go up and build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. And all those who were around them encouraged them with the articles of silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with precious things, besides all that was willingly offered. King Cyrus also brought out the articles of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem and put in the temple of his gods. And Cyrus the king of Persia brought them out by the hand of Mithridates the treasurer, and counted them out to Sheshbazzar the prince of Judah. So we have a wonderful group of people here, a nice amalgamation of influence here and of what is going on. We have the elders, the people, and the king, all providing something to this move. First of all, we see the elders of the people. These are the chiefs of the fathers, literally the heads of the fathers. They gather. These are the people that were the hereditary heads of the families. So the patriarchs of the current families came and gathered together, symbolizing the leadership, that we are a part of this. We are engaged in this activity. You know, it's hard, it's easy sometimes to talk about, we should do this. Wouldn't it be so nice if in this congregation we did this? And there's times and places that we need to sit and have creative minds and think, wow, that'd be really nice. And then there's also times for action. And these men were ready for action. They were ready to stand up and show that they were a part of the process. This was going to be a long journey. It said they stood up to go build the house. They got to get up. They got to go to Jerusalem. They got to establish themselves there. They got to start the work. They got to work for however long it is. And then they got to build the temple. There was a lot to do, but you know what they did? They took the first step. They engaged themselves in the activity. They got past the creative space, which again, is fantastic. We need to be in a creative space, in a creative thought process to think how we can change and how we can develop ourselves. And then there's a time to close that and then to engage the work. And these men were ready to engage the work, and they were set examples for their families. I'm a part of this. How impactful is it when our families and our children and our brothers and sisters see us engaged in activities, that they see us stand and proclaim our allegiance to an activity, our allegiance to worship? How important is it that our children see us in the pew Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night? That they see that we're here, dedicated to the service in the way that we act. Because their spirits will also stirred up. Cyrus was stirred up by God. These men were stirred up by God. And they acted upon that stirring. Next we see the people. And it says that they gave to others. One translation says that they strengthened the hands of others. This wording is also seen as, I think it's Nehemiah prays as he's building the wall. And I don't know if this is going to be shown later in the class, but this is when Nehemiah was building the wall and there was people around him, adversaries around him, and they said, "You're no good, Nehemiah. Your work's no good." And Nehemiah simply prayed to God, "Strengthen my hands that I might be able to work." Their hands had been strengthened here before that prayer. They strengthened the hands of others by rendering aid, by rendering support, by seeing that their neighbors were engaged in this wonderful journey to go build the house of God, to build the temple. I'm going to be a part of that. How can I be a part of that? I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you my time. I'm going to give you my monetary value that I can give in whatever shape that is. And they gave freely. And again, this was the family and the non-believing neighbors that gather around those leaving. Not only was it the Jews that were staying behind, but it was also the pagan neighbors. Again, what an important impact it is for us to have influence on the non-believers. 1 Thessalonians tells us that we should mind our own business, work with our own hands so that we can win the respect of outsiders. Now, to be minding your own business means we're minding the business of God. We're working for God. We're working with our hands. We're showing we're a diligent worker and lead a quiet life. Because what does that do? That wins the respect of outsiders. Clearly, these people had won the respect of outsiders because these people gave freely. It was a direct decree from Cyrus, yet he said, give a free will offering, and that's what they did. They gave freely to those around him. And finally, we see the king and the example that he sets. He showed a great example. The king considered the disposition and valuation and gave freely back to the people. He presented the treasuries to the recognized royalty of Judah. The Babylonians were great at record keeping. They had scribes and they had all these people that all just kept all the records. And so he said, we took this stuff. We have a record of it. So he went and said, record keeper, go get the stuff that we took and give it back. And not only did he didn't just throw it in a pile and say, take it. He recognized that there was a current ruler of Jerusalem, a current ruler of Judah, the lineage of the king, and he gave it back to that recognized royalty. He laid the foundation that not only do I have things that don't belong to me and I'm going to give them back, I'm going to give it back to the right person who knows what to do with it and who can put it to the best use. What a wonderful example this king set as he went through this process. Some more application that we can see here. When we allow ourselves to be stirred up by God, it can impact all levels of our influence, our family, our community, and our government. As we get older in life, we're influencers. We ask people to come on a journey with us. We can't tell them what to do. We can't make people change, yet we can extend a hand and say, will you come along with me on this journey? And we can influence them. If we're stirred up in our lives and if we're stirred up by God, we can impact the family around us. We can show more love. We can show more grace. We can show more kindness to those around us. We can serve in our community. Elders specifically in Titus are called out to be pillars of their community. One of the words that Titus uses as he describes the work of the elders in the community is that it makes a community continent. One time when I was teaching that, I was very confused by that word, and I said, how in the world are elders like a landmass? I don't understand that. And then I said, oh, continent, like Pepto-Bismol, right? It keeps you continent. It keeps you regular. That's what they're doing. The elders affect their community by keeping them regular, by keeping them normal and aligned to God. And beyond that, we can influence our government. We can influence our leaders. As we raise our young people and as we influence those around us, we can bring them back to God. And I'm here to tell you today, I don't know what you see in your society. I am seeing the start of another great awakening. I'm seeing people who were once pagans, people that have lived, or not pagans, but atheists, that have lived in an atheistic lifestyle, who are seeing that God is necessary. We're living, as Greg was talking about, in an era of post-truth. That there's no such thing as absolute truth. But different people that I've been seeing and reading, and even Richard Dawkins, who was a confirmed atheist, said, I'm a cultural Christian. I don't believe in God, but I believe that Christianity has something that nobody else has and can keep society in line and can do us better than most other things. Second application here is how we react to others' experiences speaks volumes about our ability to empathize. I don't know if you're a fan of Dr. Jordan Peterson. I like to listen to him and to consider his teachings. One of the things that he shares, as he does sometimes, is be careful who you share bad news with. Be careful who you share bad news with, because there are certain people that you might see enjoyment on their face. That if you share a bad experience, they might enjoy that. And there's other people that if you share good things with them, they might not enjoy that at all. They might be down on that. And how we react, if we're on the other side of that, if we're reacting to bad news and we're happy about that, if we react to good news and we don't feel good about that person, maybe that speaks about how to empathize and where our heart is and where we have a disposition and where we need to grow a little bit. How we react to others speaks volumes to that. Those pagan people, the neighbors that weren't going, they didn't hold a grudge against their neighbors. Well, why do these people have freedom and I don't? Why am I still under servitude? Why do I still have to stay here? They said, these people have an opportunity to go. God bless them for that. God has given them a blessing. I hope that I can abide by that and just to give as much as I can, as much energy as possible for them to realize what God has given to them. We need to understand that we need to be able to empathize with others and to give them grace as God does. Application number 3, godly acts by our government should be seen as God's influence in interaction. When the government does something right, we should praise God, right? Because he's done that. He's interacted. We've benefited from what he's done. He's holding the hands of the leaders if they allow him to do that. Finally, this morning, the last point we have here, the kind partnership that we see between the king and the people as they're leaving. Ezra chapter 2, we're going to be the last few verses there of that chapter. The whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337. And they had 200 men and women singers. Their horses were 736, their mules 245, their camels 435, and their donkeys 6,720. Some of the heads of the fathers' houses, when they came to the house of the Lord, which was in Jerusalem, offered freely for the house of God to erect it in its place. According to their ability, they gave to the treasury for their work 61,000 gold drachmas, 5,000 minas of silver, and 100 priestly garments. So the priests and the Levi, some of the people, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the Nethinim dwelt in their cities, and all Israel in their cities. So we see this kept group. We have a group that's been kept specifically for the process and the purpose of God. First of all, we see that 42,000, a bit more than 42,000 people left. This was more that came in, is my understanding as it is with the numbers, that there was a number of people that came in, and this number is greater than that. So more people left than came in. So these people, as they were in their captivity, they did what they were supposed to do. They got along. They had families. They were instructed to do that. And then there was a contingent that was able to go, a powerful force that left. There were servants, men and women, that were leaving. And there were also professional singers. First Chronicles 25 speaks to this type of professional singer. All these children of Heman, which are mentioned in the previous verse, were under the direction of their father for the music in the house of the Lord with cymbals, stringed instruments, and harps, for the service of the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the authority of the king. So the number of them, which their brethren who were instructed in the song of the Lord, all were skillful, as was 288. This is the type of person that we're talking about as we're discussing a professional singer here. During the captivity, go one more there. So during the captivity, parents were devoted to instruct and exercise their children in God's service. When the temple would be rebuilt, they would be ready for the service of God. During the captivity, parents were involved in their children's lives. Parents were involved in the instruction and teaching of God, just as Moses had required them to do. That as they would walk along the way, or as they would get up or go down in the day, they would instruct in the teaching of God. And we see specifically that even got to the very specific aspect of being professional singers, that they were trained in the singing of God. And that allowed them then to go back and to continue that worship. In our sojourn through a foreign land, what are we doing to ensure our children are prepared for the service of the Lord? Are we engaging them in the instruction of God? It doesn't just happen randomly. If we put a child on a pew and we leave them there for 16 years, they're not just all of a sudden going to get up one day equipped to, for a young man, I'm thinking of my oldest, to lead a prayer or to lead a song or to give a sermon. It doesn't just spontaneously combust out of them. We have to spend the time and dedication in training. Even when we're in captivity, even when we have no idea of where our life is going to go, we are to still instruct and to train to allow them to serve the Lord at the appropriate time. Finally, we see some kingly gifts that are given. First of all, some gifts of money, some monetary gifts that the king provided them. First of all, we have gold. Now, I'm going to put this with a little bit of a grain of salt. This is the best calculation that I can find for today's value. This might not be totally accurate. It might be off a little bit here or there, say within a threshold, but it's the best that I could come up with. The idea of when we read these things in the Bible, the talents or the other types of currency, what does that actually mean? Well, there was gold that was given, there was silver that was given, and there were priestly garments. Okay, 3 monetary gifts that were provided. So what does that evaluate or come out to today? Well, first of all, we had gold. Ended up in about $24 million that I can figure out in gold. Pretty good amount of gold, you know. That the king provided them an abundance to go back, right? Of the free. Now, again, this was the free will offering. This isn't even talking about the things that were taken from the temple. This is just the money that was provided to them, okay, as they went out. A little bit of silver, $1.9 million in silver. Okay, pretty good. Not a bad thing. And then we had these priestly garments that are worth probably thousands of dollars. If you go back and look at how the robes were ordained and all the different jewels and all the different aspects of the kingly or the priestly robes, these weren't just robes that they, pulled off a bolt of fabric and kind of put something together. These would have been very expensive. So 100 of those. So I'd say probably thousands of dollars that were provided. Then we had animal gifts that were provided. We have horses, the mules, the camels, and the donkeys. The horses, there were 736 horses, and these were war horses. Okay, horses weren't provided for just the common man at this time. These were reserved, 1 for royalty, and then 2 for the military. So these horses, it's from my understanding, the Iranian horses, the Persian horses at the time, the breed is now extinct, but it was a battle horse, the Nissan horse, and it had a very stout head and was ready for battle. Okay, so these again weren't workhorses in a sense, but they were to demonstrate the value of the royalty that was being provided back to the people. Okay, this was a very special gift that was provided. These wouldn't be pulling plows or anything like that. This was for the military and then also for the royalty. Then we have the mules. What's the difference between a donkey and a mule? Anybody remember? Do I? Right. Mules are half horse, half donkey. Okay. They have different amount of chromosomes than horses or donkeys, and so they're a hybrid, typically which are sterile. It's very, very rare for mules to have foals, just because they're a mutant, right? They're a hybrid. Same thing if like a liger, like a lion and a tiger, they can breed together and they can produce young, but that young cannot then propagate at all. Okay, that's what a mule is. Okay. These are precious and scarce animals because you have to actively breed them and they don't propagate. So it's a lot of activity around this. And they, again, were reserved for royalty. To have someone transported on a mule would have been very precious and, again, a sign of royalty. They're a bit more, from my understanding, temperamental, or they're less temperamental than donkeys. They're a bit more friendly, amiable, better to get along with. Again, very precious animals. Then we have camels. The typical beast of burden, the most serviceable of all the animals that were given. These would have been loaded down, great for the terrain, great for the environment, again, that they have, the desert environment. So these would have just been pack animals here. Maybe somebody would have rode, but most likely they would have been carrying very heavy burdens, because of all those 42,000 people, we don't have 42,000 animals that are leaving. Everybody's not going to get a ride, right? Most of the people are going to be walking. This is going to be a great pack animal. And then again with the donkeys, again, the most common of all, 6,000 donkeys. Again, beasts of burdens. Maybe some would have provided a ride for people, but most likely it was just along the way for the beast of burden. So when we look at the gifts, we see that the gifts were useful, precious, thoughtful, and appropriate. These gifts had meaning. They were useful. The people they weren't just going to sit by the wayside. I have a gift, I'm going to use it. They were precious things. They were things that would impact the bottom line of the king. And they were thoughtful. These people are coming out of captivity and they need robes to serve God. Right? The priests need to go and they need to have refinement and need to rein themselves in something that would be suitable for a priest. And they were provided that. Now, maybe they had to take it and change it and make it what God totally wanted, but it gave them a baseline, right? It gave them something to go. And they were appropriate gifts. It was something that was serviceable and was very thoughtful and appropriate for those times. So my question is, do the gifts that we have, the gifts that we give today, do we give those type of gifts? Gift giving is something that's really important to me. It's one of my love languages. If you've ever read that book, the 7 love languages. I like giving gifts. I like being specific about the gifts that I give. And it's important to me because it means that I know that person and I put time and thought into what they like, and I'm providing them something that they'll enjoy. I'm not so worried about today when I ask that about the physical gifts that we give, although it could bleed into that in some way, but are the spiritual gifts that we give to people useful, thoughtful, precious, and appropriate? Are we giving of ourselves? Are we taking the time out of our schedule to sit down with the younger generation, with the older generation, wherever we fall on that scale, as Titus introduces us to the people of God, the old men, the aged women, the young men, the young women? Are we going beyond ourselves in our groups and looking at the others around us and saying, I can impact the young men. I could be a blessing to the older men. I could get along with the younger women better. The older women can teach me so many things. Let me go talk to them and see what they can give me, the thoughts that they can do. What are the gifts that we're giving to others? Are they useful? Are they precious? Are they thoughtful? Are they appropriate? What we do. All things considered, as we close this morning, God holds the hearts of our leaders in his hands. We need to remember that it's easy in kind of the echo chamber that we have going on today of left versus right or wherever we fall on that spectrum, that it seems like we just hate each other and nothing is right with the government and everybody's bad and we're just going to fall apart. Well, if you take away the noise, most surveys show that we're closer to our opposing views, the neighbors with our opposing views, we're closer to them than we really think. And then all in all, God holds the hearts of our leaders in his hands. And it's up to us to pray for them actively, even the ones we don't like, to ask them that God would influence them and to help them know of him, and to help them, our leaders, grab the hand of God as they go forward. Two, as God keeps his people, we are responsible for growth and development, especially of the next generation. We are in a foreign land. We have a home that we're going to. We're in the same situation as these people. It's not as an immediate move necessarily, but there are those who are closer than others, and we are in a foreign land. And as we're here, it's our job to grow and develop ourselves and the next generation so that God can propagate his people as we go along. Third thing, if we allow ourselves to be animated by God, it can reverberate through our circle of influence. I don't know what you're doing in your life to grow yourself. I don't know what you're doing to challenge yourself to be spiritually excellent in everything you do. I hope you do on a regular basis. As you do that, and maybe as you struggle with the things and struggle with the growth that you're doing, know that influence can affect other people. Know that the changes you make are not insulary, that they have a ripple effect. And if you're working on being more peaceful or more calm or more loving in your life, people will feel that. People will understand the change that maybe happened to you, and that can help drive their change and drive their life closer to God. We have a few application things. We don't have time this morning to go through them. I'm going to go through here. We got 3 minutes left. And I had a song, and my voice is shot, so I'm not going to do the song. So we're going to go through that. And there we go. Lesson 2 next week, restoration, starting from Ezra 3, verses 1 to 13. Yes, Miss Betty.
Because the old law was hard. It was hands-on. The rebuilding of the temple here tells us how much that was. Jesus came, and he loved us. And when he died on the cross and gave us the new law, it's more spiritual.
That's right. Yeah.
And I don't understand why it would be hard for anybody to accept it. Look at the old law and what those people had to do.